Welcome, dear listeners, to Miss Marple and the Sinister Choir Girl of Old Orchard Well, a cozy Miss Marple murder mystery in the classic style of Agatha Christie. Settle into your favorite armchair with a cup of tea as we journey to the quaint village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s. Here, amidst blooming gardens and gossiping villagers, our sharp-eyed elderly detective, Miss Jane Marple, unravels a puzzling tale of deception and hidden motives. This audiobook is divided into 10 chapters for your convenience, each lasting about 8 to 10 minutes when narrated at a leisurely pace. Let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Well. In the heart of St. Mary Mead, where the seasons turned with a gentle predictability, and the village lanes were lined with hedgerows bursting with wild roses, life unfolded at a rhythm as steady as the church bells that chimed each Sunday. It was a crisp autumn morning in 1952, with the air carrying the sharp tang of fallen leaves and the distant scent of wood smoke from cottage chimneys. The village, nestled in the rolling hills of the English countryside, seemed to embody an eternal calm, its thatched roofs and cobblestone paths a testament to a world untouched by the frenetic pace of modern cities. Yet, beneath this serene veneer, a shadow was about to fall, one that would stir the quiet lanes and set tongues wagging in every tea shop and post office. Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster with a penchant for knitting and an even keener eye for human nature, sat in her cottage garden at Mead, her fingers deftly working a pair of needles through soft gray wool. Her garden, a modest affair with neatly trimmed lavender bushes and a trellis of climbing roses, was her sanctuary, a place where she could observe the comings and goings of St. Mary Mead without seeming to pry. From her wicker chair, she could see the postman's bicycle wobble down the lane, hear the laughter of children playing near the village green, and catch snippets of gossip carried by the breeze. It was here, think. Cherry shook her head vigorously, her curls bouncing. No one knows, ma'am. Tommy says she was in her white choir dress, just floating there, her hair all spread out like a halo. Some say she must have fallen in the dark. But why was she out there at night? It's a good half-mile from her cottage, and that well's been boarded up for years, or so folk thought. Miss Marple's fingers resumed their knitting, the rhythmic click of the needles a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Accidents, Cherry, are rarely as accidental as they seem, she murmured. One must always look to the human element. Tell me, what do the villagers say about Eliza? Cherry perched on the edge of a garden bench, eager to share the gossip. Well, she was ever so lovely, wasn't she? Only 19, with a voice like an angel. Sang solos in St. Mary's church choir, and everyone said she could have gone to London for the stage. But she was particular, you know. Kept to herself mostly, though she had her admirers. Lydia Finch, that other choir girl, was always green with envy, they say. And Mr. Blackwood, the choir master, was forever praising Eliza, which didn't sit well with some. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sifting through the threads of this new puzzle. Eliza Thorne had been a fixture in the village, her clear soprano voice rising above the choir like a lark's song on a summer morning. Yet beauty and talent, Miss Marple knew, often stirred darker currents. Envy, resentment, perhaps something deeper. The old orchard well, a relic from medieval times, stood on the edge of Giles Harrow's farm, surrounded by gnarled apple trees that bore fruit as tart as village gossip. It was a place steeped in local lore, said to grant wishes or harbor curses, depending on who told the tale. Why had Eliza been there, and how had she met such a grim fate? As Cherry prattled on, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a similar incident from her youth, a drowning in a pond, dismissed as an accident until a sharp-eyed neighbor noticed a button missing from a suspect's coat. "Details, Cherry," she said suddenly, into Marple rose, smoothing her skirt with a practiced hand. "I think, Cherry, I shall take a walk to the vicarage. Reverend Clement will be organizing some comfort for the family, no doubt. And one hears so much in such gatherings." She picked up her basket, tucking her knitting inside, and adjusted her hat. A sensible affair with a single feather. "Do keep an ear out for more talk, my dear. The smallest detail can be the key to a lock no one knew was there." The walk to the vicarage took Miss Marple through the heart of St. Mary Mead, past the post office where Mrs. Price was already recounting the tragedy to a cluster of wide-eyed villagers, and the tea shop where the scent of fresh scones mingled with whispered speculations. The village green was quieter than usual, the children's games subdued, as news of Eliza's death cast a pall. Miss Marple noted the faces she passed. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, with her knack for overhearing secrets. Young Tommy Pierce, looking shaken as he recounted his discovery to a policeman. And Farmer Giles Harrow, trudging toward his orchard with a scowl, muttering about trespassers. At the vicarage, a rambling stone house with ivy climbing its walls, Miss Marple found a small crowd gathered in the drawing room. Reverend Leonard Clement, a kindly man with a shock of white hair and a passion for botany, was offering tea to Eliza's distraught mother, Mrs. Thorne. Griselda, the vicar's young wife, bustled about with a tray of biscuits, her usual cheer tempered by the occasion. Among the visitors were several figures Miss Marple noted with interest. Arthur Blackwood, the choirmaster, his stern face set in a mask of solemnity. Lydia Finch, Eliza's fellow choir girl, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. And Dr. Emily Hayes, the village physician, her medical bag at her side as she spoke softly to the vicar. "Such a terrible loss," Reverend Clement said, his voice heavy. "Eliza was a light in our choir, a gift to St. Mary Mead. We must pray for her soul and Eliza only last week for a minor ailment. She seemed in good spirits, though perhaps a touch anxious. Such a vibrant girl." Her fingers tightened briefly on her bag, a gesture Miss Marple filed away. As the conversation turned to funeral arrangements, Miss Marple slipped out to the vicarage garden, where the Reverend's prized herb beds flourished. She paused by a cluster of foxglove, its purple bells swaying gently. A faint memory stirred. Foxglove, in the right dose, was medicinal. In the wrong, deadly. Had Eliza's death been a simple fall? Or had something more sinister led her to the well's edge? A torn hymn sheet found by Tommy near the bucket bore Arthur's initials. A clue? Or mere coincidence? Returning to the drawing room, Miss Marple caught a snippet of gossip from Griselda. "Eliza had a secret admirer, you know," the vicar's wife whispered. "Unsigned letters left in her hymn book. She was thrilled, but secretive." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A secret admirer could mean love or danger. As she left the vicarage, the church bells tolled, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the village's unease. Miss Marple walked slowly home, her mind weaving the threads of what she'd heard and seen. Eliza Thorne's death was no accident, she was certain. The poison, the well, the hymn sheet. They pointed to a human hand, guided by motives yet to be uncovered. In St. Mary Mead, where secrets hid behind lace curtains, Miss Marple knew the truth lay in the everyday. A glance, a word, a scent. The game, as she often thought, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Vicarage Gathering. The morning sun filtered through the leaded windows of the vicarage in St. Mary Mead, casting a warm, dappled light across the drawing room where villagers had gathered under the guise of offering condolences. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea and the faint sweetness of Griselda Clement's homemade scones set out on a lace-covered table. The room, with its chintz curtains and polished oak furniture, exuded the comforting familiarity of a bygone era. Yet an undercurrent of unease rippled gesture, every flicker of emotion in the room. Reverend Leonard Clement stood by the fireplace, his kindly face creased with concern, as he spoke softly to Mrs. Thorne, who clutched a crumpled handkerchief. His white hair gleamed in the morning light, and his hands, stained faintly green from his hours tending the vicarage garden, gestured with a soothing calm. "We must trust in Providence, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice steady. "Eliza's voice was a gift to us all, and we shall honor her memory at Sunday service." Griselda, his young wife, flitted about with a silver tray, offering scones and murmured platitudes. Her bright auburn curls bounced as she moved, and her usual vivacity was tempered by the somber occasion. "More tea, Miss Marple?" she asked, pausing by the armchair. "It's such a dreadful thing, isn't it? Poor Eliza, out there alone in the dark." Miss Marple accepted a refill, her smile polite but her mind alert. "Dreadful indeed, Griselda, and so unexpected. Had Eliza seemed troubled to you recently? You must have seen her often at choir practice." Griselda hesitated, glancing toward the others in the room. "Well, she was always a bit dreamy, wasn't she? Full of fancies about singing in grand concert halls. But lately she'd been quieter, perhaps, kept to herself after practice, clutching her hymn book like it held secrets." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Secrets, you say? How intriguing." She turned her attention to the others in the room, each a potential thread in the tapestry of Eliza's demise. 4 figures stood out, their presence and behavior drawing her keen observational eye, like moths to a flame. Arthur Blackwood, the choir master, stood near the window, his tall, angular frame rigid with a tension that belied his composed expression. His dark suit was immaculate, but his fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the windowsill, and his thin lips were set in a line that suggested more irritation than grief. Thorne, her voice trembling with what seemed like rehearsed sorrow. "Eliza and I shared everything, our music, our dreams." Yet her eyes, when they met Miss Marple's, darted away quickly, and the handkerchief remained curiously dry. Miss Marple recalled whispers that Lydia had envied Eliza's talent and the attention it garnered. As Eliza's understudy, Lydia stood to gain from her absence, a fact that hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. Yet envy alone, Miss Marple knew, was rarely enough to drive one to murder. There must be more. A deeper wound, perhaps, or a hidden gain. Farmer Giles Harrow, a burly man with weathered hands and a perpetual scowl, stood awkwardly by the door, as if eager to escape the stifling room. His corduroy jacket was patched at the elbows, and his boots bore traces of orchard mud. "That well's a hazard," he grumbled to no one in particular. "Should have filled it in years ago. Trespassers are always poking about my land, ruining my apples." His eyes avoided Mrs. Thorne's, and Miss Marple noted a faint flush on his ruddy cheeks, as if guilt or discomfort weighed on him. Giles owned the orchard where the well stood, and his farm had been struggling since a poor harvest the previous year. Had Eliza's presence there threatened him in some way? Or was his gruff demeanor merely a shield for a man out of place among the village's more refined gatherings? Dr. Emily Hayes, the village physician, sat composed in a high-backed chair, her medical bag resting at her feet like a loyal companion. In her early 30s, with sharp features and a calm demeanor, she exuded an air of quiet authority. "I saw Eliza only last week," she said to Griselda, her voice measured. "A touch of nerves, nothing serious. I prescribed a mild tonic. It's heartbreaking to think she's gone." Her fingers rested lightly on her bag, but Miss Marple caught a brief tightening of her grip, a gesture that suggested more than professional detachment. Dr. Hayes had treated Eliza for an unspecified ailment, a detail that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. Had the well itself, a relic of St. Mary Mead's medieval past, surrounded by Giles Harrow's gnarled apple trees. The villagers called it a wishing well, though its waters were too deep and murky for practical use. Why had Eliza been there at night? Had she been lured? Or was she fleeing something? Or someone? The torn hymn sheet suggested a connection to the choir, but it could be a deliberate misdirection, a red herring planted to mislead. Griselda, pausing by Miss Marple's chair, lowered her voice. "You know, Miss Marple, Eliza mentioned something odd last week at choir practice. She said she'd been getting letters, unsigned, slipped into her hymn book. She thought it was a secret admirer, but she seemed nervous, not flattered. I meant to ask her more, but..." Her voice trailed off and she shook her head. Miss Marple nodded, filing this away. "How curious," she said mildly. "Letters can say so much, or so little. Did she show them to anyone?" "Not that I know of," Griselda replied. "She kept them close, tucked in her hymn book. I suppose they're still at her cottage." The conversation shifted as Inspector Slack arrived, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence before he entered the room. A stout man with a brusque manner, he surveyed the gathering with thinly veiled impatience. "Right then," he said, addressing Reverend Clement. "We've retrieved the body. Looks like a tragic accident. Slipped and fell, most likely. No need to stir up trouble where there's none." Miss Marple's lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes gleamed with skepticism. "An accident, Inspector? How convenient. Though one wonders why a young girl would wander to a disused well in the dead of night." Slack bristled, unused to being questioned by elderly spinsters. "Miss Marple, with all due respect, not every death is a mystery. The girl was careless, that's all." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone as mild as her tea. "But carelessness, like act softly, a reminder of the village's heartbeat." Miss Marple's steps were slow, her mind anything but. The game, she thought, was well and truly afoot. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Choir Loft. The evening light cast long, colorful shadows across the stone floor of St. Mary's Church, where the stained glass windows glowed with scenes of saints and angels, their hues of crimson and sapphire softened by the fading sun. The air inside was cool, carrying the faint mustiness of old hymnals and polished pews, mingled with the lingering scent of candle wax from the morning service. It was choir practice night in St. Mary Mead, a ritual as steadfast as the village's daily rhythms. Yet tonight the atmosphere was heavy with the absence of Eliza Thorne. Her death at the old orchard well had cast a pall over the community, and the choir's voices, usually so harmonious, faltered with an unspoken tension. Miss Jane Marple sat in a pew near the back, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, a picture of unobtrusive observation. Her presence at choir practice was not unusual. She often attended to enjoy the music, her sharp eyes and sharper mind taking in more than the melodies. Tonight her basket of gray wool rested beside her, but her attention was fixed on the choir loft, where the remaining singers gathered under the stern direction of Arthur Blackwood. The choirmaster's baton tapped impatiently against his music stand, his angular face set in a scowl as he corrected a faltering alto. "Focus, please," he snapped. "We're preparing for the harvest festival, not a funeral dirge." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Arthur's brusqueness was telling, more so than his words. She noted the way his eyes darted to the empty spot where Eliza once stood, her soprano voice a cornerstone of the choir. Now Lydia Finch occupied that place, her posture stiff with self-consciousness as she sang Eliza's solo part. Her voice, while clear, lacked the ethereal quality that had made Eliza a village treasure, and Miss Marple observed the flicker of triumph in Lydia's eyes. Quickly understudy. Giles' grumbling about trespassers suggested a territorial motive, while Dr. Hayes' medical connection to Eliza hinted at knowledge of dangerous herbs. Yet none of these threads formed a complete picture, and Miss Marple knew the truth often lay in the smallest details. Details like the torn hymn sheet found near the well, bearing Arthur's initials, or the mysterious letters Griselda had mentioned. The rehearsal paused and the singers dispersed for a break, their chatter filling the church with a low hum. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow but deliberate, and approached Griselda, who was arranging hymnals near the organ. "Such a lovely practice, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "Though it must feel strange without Eliza's voice to lead." Griselda sighed, brushing a curl from her forehead. "It's like a hole in the music, isn't it? Lydia's trying, but it's not the same. And poor Arthur, he's been so cross lately. I think he feels Eliza's loss more than he lets on." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her eyes drifting to Arthur, who stood alone in the loft, flipping through sheet music with a distracted air. "You mentioned Eliza's secret admirer yesterday. Did she ever say more about those letters? They might offer some insight into her state of mind." Griselda's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I'd nearly forgotten. She showed me one, just once, a week or so ago. It was tucked in her hymn book, written in a neat hand but unsigned. Something about meeting her after practice, near the orchard. I told her to be careful. Secret admirers can be dangerous, you know. But she laughed it off, said it was romantic." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her knitting. "Near the orchard, you say? How curious. Did she keep the letters?" "I think so," Griselda replied. "She always carried her hymn book home. Her mother might have it now, at their cottage." As the choir resumed, Miss Marple returned to her pew, her mind turning over this new thread. A letter. Marple recalled a case from her youth, where a jealous seamstress had sabotaged a rival's work, only to be undone by a single misplaced thread. Human nature, she mused, was as predictable as it was complex. As practice ended, the singers drifted out into the evening, their voices fading into the soft chirping of crickets. Miss Marple lingered, offering to help Griselda tidy the loft, a pretext to examine the hymnals. As she straightened the books, she found one with Eliza's name penciled inside, its pages slightly worn. A quick glance revealed no letters, but a faint crease suggested something had been tucked inside recently. She slipped the book back, deciding to inquire at the Thorn Cottage later. Outside, the churchyard was bathed in twilight, the gravestones casting long shadows across the grass. Miss Marple paused by the gate, where she overheard two villagers whispering. "Saw Lydia near the orchard that night," one said. "Skulking about, looked guilty as sin." The other shook her head. "Lydia? She was at the post office till late. Mrs. Weatherby said so." A red herring, Miss Marple thought, dismissing the rumor for now. Alibis could be checked, and Mrs. Weatherby's word was reliable. More intriguing was the scent she'd noticed on Arthur's coat at the vicarage, a faint, herbal aroma, like the foxglove in Reverend Clement's garden. She made her way to the vicarage, where the garden lay quiet under the stars, its herb beds a patchwork of shadows and moonlight. Reverend Clement was tending his plants, his sleeves rolled up as he pruned a rosemary bush. "Miss Marple, a surprise to see you so late," he said, his smile warm. "Come to admire my herbs?" "They are lovely," she replied, her eyes scanning the foxglove. "Such potent plants, though. Foxglove, for instance, medicinal but dangerous in the wrong hands." The vicar nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Indeed. I use it sparingly for my heart tonic, but I keep the garden locked. Only a few have the key. Myself, Griselda, and Arthur, who's keen on botany. He's always borrowing clip with curiosity." "Only whispers, Cherry," Miss Marple replied, settling into her armchair. "But whispers can lead to truths if one listens closely." She sipped her cocoa, her mind weaving the evening's observations into a tapestry of suspicion. Arthur's temper, Lydia's ambition, the letters, the foxglove. All were threads, but the pattern remained elusive. She thought of a village scandal years ago, where a stolen letter had revealed a betrayal. The key, she knew, lay in the everyday. A glance, a scent, a lie. As she prepared for bed, Miss Marple glanced out her window at the darkened village. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, a killer hid behind a mask of normalcy. But masks, she knew, had a way of slipping, and she intended to be there when they did. Chapter 4. The Orchard's Secrets. The autumn sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the rolling hills with a golden glow that softened the edges of the village's thatched cottages and ancient hedgerows. The air carried the crisp bite of October, mingled with the earthy scent of fallen apples from the orchards that fringed the village. It was the day after the somber choir practice, and Miss Jane Marple, armed with her wicker basket and a pretext of gathering apples for a pie, made her way to the old orchard well where Eliza Thorne had met her untimely end. The well, a moss-covered relic nestled among Giles Harrow's gnarled apple trees, stood as a silent witness to the tragedy that had shaken the village's tranquil rhythm. Miss Marple's steps were measured, her sensible shoes crunching on the fallen leaves as she navigated the uneven path to the orchard. Her gray shawl was draped over her shoulders, and her eyes, bright and inquisitive behind her spectacles, scanned the surroundings with the precision of a hawk. To any passerby, she was merely an elderly spinster indulging in a morning stroll. But her mind was as sharp as the knitting needles tucked in her basket, piecing together the threads of Eliza's death. The torn hymn sheet, the secret letters, the herbal scent on Arthur Blackwood's coat. These were clues, but they needed context, and the orchard held answers. The well itself was the well. The earth was soft from recent rain, and a patchwork of footprints crisscrossed the mud, some small, likely Tommy's, others larger, with a distinctive tread. She recalled Giles Harrow's heavy boots at the vicarage, caked with orchard mud. Could he have been here that night, checking his fences as he claimed? Or was there a darker purpose? A glint in the grass caught her eye, a shard of glass, perhaps from a vial, half buried near the well. She tucked it into her handkerchief, mindful not to disturb it further. It might mean nothing, or it might be the key to a lock she had yet to find. As she stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, Giles Harrow himself appeared, tramping through the orchard with a scowl. His corduroy jacket was patched, his face ruddy from years of outdoor toil. "Miss Marple," he said gruffly, tipping his cap. "Didn't expect to see you here. Come to pick apples, have you?" "Indeed, Mr. Harrow," she replied, her voice warm but her eyes alert. "Though I confess, curiosity brought me to the well. Such a tragedy, poor Eliza." "Were you here that night by any chance? Checking your fences, perhaps?" Giles' scowl deepened, and he shifted his weight. "Aye, I check my fences most nights. Trespassers are a plague, always trampling my crops. Didn't see nothing unusual, though. That well's a menace. Should have filled it in years ago." His eyes darted to the well, then away, and Miss Marple noted the unease in his posture, like a man carrying a burden he dared not share. "Quite a hazard," she agreed mildly. "Though it's strange, isn't it, that Eliza would come here alone? Perhaps she was meeting someone." She watched his reaction, but Giles only grunted, muttering about getting back to work. As he trudged off, she filed away his evasiveness, wondering if his struggling farm held a motive she had yet to uncover. Returning to the village, Miss Marple passed the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby was turning to a case from her youth, where a heated argument had masked a deeper betrayal. The human heart, she mused, was a maze of motives, and St. Mary Mead was no exception. At the vicarage, she found Inspector Slack, his stout frame filling the doorway as he spoke with Reverend Clement. His notebook was open, but his expression was one of impatience, as if the case were already closed. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone barely civil. "Meddling again, are you? This is a straightforward case. Girl slipped, fell, drowned. No need to make a mystery where there's none." Miss Marple's smile was polite, her eyes twinkling with quiet defiance. "Oh, Inspector, I'm sure you're right. But one does wonder why a young girl would wander to a disused well at night. And that hymn sheet. Such an odd thing to find, don't you think?" Slack bristled, flipping his notebook shut. "Hymn sheet's nothing. Probably dropped it earlier. You leave the detecting to me, Miss Marple." He strode off, leaving her to exchange a glance with the vicar, who shook his head in amusement. "Dear Inspector Slack," Reverend Clement said, leading her into the garden. "He means well, but he lacks your insight. Have you found anything of interest?" Miss Marple hesitated, then shared her discovery of the glass shard. "It may be nothing, but I wonder if Dr. Hayes might identify it. A vial, perhaps, from her medical bag?" The vicar frowned, his hands brushing a foxglove plant. "A vial? That's troubling. My garden's open to so few, Griselda, myself, Arthur. I trust them, but—" His voice trailed off, and Miss Marple noted the worry in his eyes. The garden, with its rows of herbs, was both a sanctuary and a potential source of danger. Foxglove, she knew, could be distilled into a poison that mimicked a heart ailment, leading to confusion and collapse, perfect for staging an accident. As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple detoured to the Thorn cottage, where Eliza's mother was sorting through her daughter's belongings, mind buzzing. The note confirmed Griselda's story, but its brevity was frustrating. Who had written it, and why had Eliza trusted it? She thought of Arthur's botanical knowledge, Lydia's ambition, Giles's proximity to the well, Dr. Hayes's access to poisons. Each suspect was a thread, but the pattern was still unclear. As she walked home, the village was settling into evening, the lanterns glowing softly in cottage windows. A group of children played near the green, their laughter a stark contrast to the mystery weighing on her mind. She recalled a village scandal from years past, where a forged note had led to a theft. Could this note be a forgery too, meant to mislead? Or was it the key to the killer's identity? At Mead, Cherry greeted her with a pot of tea. "Any clues, Miss Marple?" she asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Perhaps, Cherry," Miss Marple replied, settling into her armchair. "A shard of glass, a note, a scent. These are pieces of a puzzle. But puzzles, my dear, are solved by seeing what others overlook." She sipped her tea, her thoughts weaving through the day's discoveries. The orchard had whispered its secrets, but the loudest was yet to come. Chapter 5. Tea and Testimonies. The soft clink of porcelain cups and the gentle hum of conversation filled Miss Jane Marple's cozy sitting room at Mead, where the late afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table. It was the third day since Eliza Thorne's body was found in the old orchard well, and the village of St. Mary Mead buzzed with speculation, each rumor weaving a new thread into the tapestry of suspicion. Miss Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, had invited a small group to tea under the pretext of discussing the upcoming harvest festival. But her true purpose was to unravel the motives and secrets of those closest to the tragedy. Her gray shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles resting in her lap, she sat with an air of quiet attentiveness, her sharp blue eyes missing nothing. The room was a picture of cozy comfort, with a crackling fire in the hearth and a tray of scones, jam, and clotted cream set out by Cherry, Miss Marple's young maid. The guests, carefully chosen, were the four key figures in the mystery: Arthur Blackwood, the stern choir master; Lydia Finch, Eliza's envious understudy; Giles Harrow, the gruff farmer; and Dr. Emily Hayes, the composed village physician. Each had arrived with varying degrees of reluctance, their faces betraying the strain of recent events. Miss Marple's invitations, delivered with her characteristic warmth, had been impossible to decline without arousing suspicion, and now they sat, sipping tea and exchanging polite pleasantries, unaware that they were under the scrutiny of a mind as keen as any detective's. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of purpose. "It's a comfort to gather in such troubling times, don't you think? Poor Eliza's loss has touched us all, and I thought a little tea might lift our spirits as we plan the festival." She smiled, her eyes flicking to each guest, noting their reactions. Arthur Blackwood, seated stiffly in a high-backed chair, clutched his teacup with a grip that suggested irritation rather than grief. "She's gone." Her eyes darted to Miss Marple, then away, and the older woman noted the forced sincerity in her words, as if Lydia were reciting a rehearsed script. Giles Harrow, slouched in a chair by the window, looked out of place among the delicate teacups, his weathered hands dwarfing the porcelain. His corduroy jacket bore traces of orchard mud, and his scowl deepened as he spoke. "All this fuss over a girl who shouldn't have been trespassing," he muttered. "That well's a danger, always has been. I told the vicar years ago to seal it up, but no one listens to a farmer." His eyes avoided the others, focusing instead on the garden beyond, where roses swayed in the breeze. Dr. Emily Hayes sat composed, her medical bag at her feet like a silent sentinel. Her sharp features were softened by a sympathetic smile, but her fingers rested lightly on the bag, a gesture Miss Marple had come to recognize as a telltale sign of unease. "Eliza was a patient of mine," she said, her voice calm but measured. "She came to me a few weeks ago, complaining of nerves. I prescribed a mild herbal tonic, nothing unusual. It's heartbreaking to think she met such a fate." Her eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, and the older woman sensed a guardedness behind the doctor's professional demeanor. As Jerry refilled the teapot, Miss Marple steered the conversation gently, weaving her questions into the fabric of casual chatter. "It's so tragic, isn't it, that Eliza was alone that night," she said, offering a scone to Lydia. "I heard she had a secret admirer, leaving notes in her hymn book. Did she ever mention anything to you, my dear? You were so close after all." Lydia's hand froze mid-bite, and a faint blush crept up her neck. "Oh, well, she did say something about letters," she admitted, her voice faltering. "She thought it was romantic, but I told her to be careful. She never showed me the notes, though. She kept them private." Her eyes flicked to Arthur, then back to her plate, and Miss Marple noted the tension in her posture, as if she were holding back more than she revealed. Turning to Dr. Hayes, Miss Marple tilted her head. "And you, Doctor?" Eyes were sharp, watching for any crack in his gruff exterior. Giles shifted uncomfortably, his teacup clattering against its saucer. "Nothing out of the ordinary," he said gruffly. "Just the usual. Wind in the trees, maybe an owl. I was nowhere near the well itself. Too busy with my own troubles." His evasiveness was palpable, and Miss Marple wondered if his struggling farm held a motive she had yet to uncover. Arthur, sensing the conversation's direction, interjected. "Really, Miss Marple, this feels like an inquisition. Eliza was a talented girl, but headstrong. She wandered off alone often enough. Perhaps she was meeting this so-called admirer and fell in the dark. No need to invent conspiracies." His words were sharp, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, and Miss Marple noted the way he avoided mentioning the hymn sheet found near the well. The conversation turned to lighter topics, the harvest festival, the church's new organ. But Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of the afternoon. A red herring had emerged in the village gossip. A missing necklace, said to have been worn by Eliza the night she died. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, had whispered about it at the tea shop, suggesting theft as a motive. Giles, with his farm's financial woes, was the obvious suspect. But Miss Marple dismissed it for now. The footprints she'd seen at the well were too fresh, likely from Tommy Pierce or the police, and a necklace seemed too petty a prize for murder. As the guests nibbled on scones, Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth, where a stolen trinket had masked a deeper crime. The necklace might be a distraction, But the note found in Eliza's hymn book, "Meet me at the orchard," was a tangible clue. Had it lured her to her death, or was it a coincidence? She thought of the glass shard she'd found near the well, tucked safely in her handkerchief. Could it be from a vial? Perhaps one containing foxglove. Dr. Hayes's tonic was a possibility, but so was Arthur's botanical. Tell more than words ever could. She sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the afternoon's revelations. Lydia's envy, Arthur's defensiveness, Giles's evasiveness, Dr. Hayes's guarded calm. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. Outside, the village settled into dusk, the lanterns glowing softly in cottage windows. The church bells tolled 5, their notes a reminder of the mystery that gripped St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple thought of the foxglove, the note, the well, threads in a web of deceit. She recalled a village scandal from years past, where a hidden motive had unraveled under the weight of small truths. The key, she knew, lay in the everyday, a scent, a gesture, a secret. As she picked up her knitting, her needles resumed their rhythmic click, a counterpoint to the questions swirling in her mind. The truth was close, but it would require patience to tease it out. Chapter 6. Misdirected Paths. The village of St. Mary Mead awoke to a bustling Saturday, the air alive with the chatter and clatter of preparations for the annual harvest festival. The village green was a hive of activity, with stalls being erected for homemade jams, knitted scarves, and apple tarts, while children darted about, their laughter mingling with the scent of fresh hay and baked goods. The festival, a cherished tradition, was meant to unite the community in celebration, but the shadow of Eliza Thorne's death at the old orchard well hung over the proceedings like a persistent mist. Miss Jane Marple, her wicker basket slung over her arm, strolled through the green under the guise of admiring the preparations, her keen eyes scanning the crowd for clues to the mystery that gripped the village. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes, but Miss Marple's thoughts were far from the festive cheer. The tea at her cottage the previous day had revealed much. Lydia Finch's thinly veiled envy, Arthur Blackwood's defensive irritability, Giles Harrow's evasive grumbling, and Dr. Emily Hayes's guarded composure. But the threads of motive and opportunity remained tangled. "Have you seen it, Mrs. Weatherby?" "Not myself, but young Tommy Pierce swears he overheard the verger mention it. Said it was typed, not handwritten, and hinted at improper conduct. The police have it now, but it stirred up a right mess." Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed with the thrill of gossip, but Miss Marple's mind was already at work. A typed letter accusing the vicar seemed a deliberate attempt to mislead, a red herring perhaps, to divert attention from the true culprit. She recalled a case from her youth where a forged letter had sown chaos until a single typo betrayed its author. Could this be a similar ploy? Making her way toward the church, where the choir was to perform a short hymn for the festival's opening, Miss Marple spotted Arthur Blackwood directing the singers with his usual intensity. His baton sliced the air, and his voice carried a sharp edge as he corrected Lydia Finch's pitch. "For heaven's sake, Lydia, you're flat again. This is a tribute to Eliza, not a caterwaul." Lydia's face reddened, but she bit her lip and continued, her hands gripping her hymn book tightly. Miss Marple noted the tension between them, a dynamic that had grown sharper since Eliza's death. Was Arthur's frustration genuine, or was it a mask for guilt? Nearby, Giles Harrow was setting up a stall with crates of his orchard's apples, his scowl deeper than usual. A group of villagers whispered nearby, and Miss Marple caught fragments of their conversation. Something about Giles being seen near the well the night Eliza died. The rumor, like the letter about the vicar, felt too convenient, too neatly planted. She approached Giles, her smile disarming. "Your apples look splendid, Mr. Harrow. I hope the festival lifts your spirits after such a trying week. It must be difficult, with the well on your land drawing so much attention." Giles grunted, stacking apples with unnecessary force. "Aye, it's a nuisance. Folk poking about, trampling my orchard. I wasn't anywhere near that well that night, no matter what they say. Was fixing a gate on the far side of the farm." His eyes avoided hers, and Miss Marple noted the defensiveness in his tone, as if he were rehearsing. "Nothing specific. Just the pressures of youth, I thought. My tonic was harmless. Chamomile and a touch of valerian. I wish I could have done more." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting tightness in her jaw, a sign of something unsaid. As the festival began, the choir's hymn rose over the green, Lydia's voice straining to fill Eliza's role. Miss Marple took a seat on a wooden bench, her knitting in hand, and watched the crowd. The letter accusing the vicar was a distraction, she was certain, but its origin intrigued her. She recalled Mrs. Weatherby's mention of it being typed, a rarity in St. Mary Mead where typewriters were few. The post office had one, as did the vicarage, and Arthur, with his meticulous nature, likely had access to both. Could he have planted it to shift suspicion? Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near Giles's stall. Two villagers, emboldened by cider, were arguing loudly about the orchard. "I saw you there, Harrow," one slurred. "Skulking about the well, night Eliza died. Don't deny it." Giles's face darkened, and he slammed a crate down, drawing eyes from across the green. "Lies," he bellowed. "I was nowhere near it." The crowd hushed, and Miss Marple noted Arthur watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. Sensing an opportunity, she approached the arguing villagers, her voice soothing. Now, let's not spoil the festival. Mr. Harrow, perhaps you could clarify for us. Where exactly were you that night?" Her question was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, catching the flicker of panic in Giles's face before he muttered about his gate repairs and stormed off. The accusation, like the letter, felt like another misdirection, but it deepened her suspicion of Giles's involvement, or someone's attempt to frame him. As the festival continued, Miss Marple slipped into the church to examine the pew where the letter was found. The verger, a kindly old man named Mr. Pye, was sweeping the aisle. "Terrible business, that letter," he said, shaking his head. "Found it tucked under a cushion, typed and unsigned. Accused the vicar of meeting Eliza in secret. Pure nonsense." Suspect. Yet Giles's defensive behavior and proximity to the well couldn't be ignored. Dr. Hayes's tonic remained a question mark. Chamomile, or something more sinister? As she wandered back to the green, a new clue caught her eye. A discarded apple core near the festival's edge, its flesh tinged with an odd, bitter scent. She bent to examine it, recalling the foxglove's acrid aroma. Had Eliza eaten something poisoned, perhaps offered by her killer? The core was near Giles's stall, but anyone could have placed it there. She tucked it into her handkerchief, alongside the glass shard, her mind racing. The festival wound down, the villagers dispersing as the sun dipped below the hills. Miss Marple walked home, the church bells tolling 6, their notes a somber reminder of the mystery. At Danemead, Cherry greeted her with a pot of tea, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Any luck, Miss Marple? The festival was all abuzz with talk of that letter." Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resuming its rhythmic click. "Talk is useful, Cherry, but clues are better. A letter, an apple core, a smudge of ink. These are threads, and someone has woven them to deceive. She sipped her tea, her thoughts turning to a village scandal years ago, where a planted rumor had nearly ruined an innocent man. The truth, she knew, lay in the details, the everyday moments that others overlooked. As the fire crackled, she felt the puzzle's edges sharpening, but the center remained elusive. The killer was close, hiding behind the festival's cheer, and Miss Marple was determined to unmask them. Chapter 7. Unraveling Threads. The soft glow of dawn crept over St. Mary Mead, painting the thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes with a delicate light that belied the darkness of the mystery surrounding Eliza Thorne's death. It was the 4th day since the young choir girl's body was found in the old orchard well, and the village, though bustling with preparations for the harvest festival, carried an undercurrent of unease. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden at Danemead, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as the anonymous note, "Meet me at the orchard," suggested a deliberate lure, and the foxglove poison pointed to someone with botanical knowledge. But which thread would lead to the truth? Determined to unravel the mystery, Miss Marple decided to revisit the church, where the choir loft and its hymnals held secrets yet to be uncovered. She donned her sensible hat, tucked her knitting into her wicker basket, and set out, her steps slow but purposeful along the village lanes. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading roses, and the church bells tolled 7, their notes a solemn reminder of the task at hand. As she passed the post office, Mrs. Weatherby waved from the doorway, her voice eager with gossip. "Miss Marple, have you heard? They're saying Eliza was blackmailing someone. Found a note in her cottage, hinting at a secret." Miss Marple paused, her smile polite but her mind alert. "Blackmail, Mrs. Weatherby. How intriguing. What did the note say?" Mrs. Weatherby leaned closer, her eyes gleaming. "Not much. Just a scrap of paper in her diary, saying, 'I know what you did, and it'll cost you.' No name, but it's got the village in a tizzy. Inspector Slack thinks it's nonsense, but I say there's more to it." Thanking her, Miss Marple continued to the church, her thoughts racing. Blackmail added a new dimension to the mystery, suggesting Eliza had stumbled upon a secret worth killing for. Was it Arthur's pride, wounded by her talent? Lydia's jealousy, pushed to extremes? Giles's financial woes, tied to some hidden shame? Or Dr. Hayes's past, veiled by her calm exterior? The church, with its ancient stone walls and stained glass windows, loomed ahead, a sanctuary of both worship and secrets. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of polished wood and old hymnals. The choir loft was empty, save for the verger, Mr. Pye, dusting the railings. He greeted Miss Marple with a nod, the ink smudge on the hymn book, similar to the forged letter accusing the vicar. A typewriter, she suspected, might link the two, and Arthur, with his meticulous nature, had access to the vicarage machine. But Lydia, too, frequented the church, and Dr. Hayes's medical precision could extend to forging notes. Giles, less likely, might still be involved if the secret threatened his farm. Her next stop was the Thorne cottage, where Mrs. Thorne was sorting through Eliza's belongings, her face etched with grief. The small parlor was cluttered with mementos, sheet music, a choir ribbon, a photograph of Eliza singing. Miss Marple offered her sympathies, then gently inquired about the diary. I heard Eliza kept a journal, she said, her voice soft. Might it hold some clue to her state of mind? Mrs. Thorne nodded wearily, fetching a leather-bound book from a shelf. She wrote in it every day, she said, her voice breaking. I haven't had the heart to read it all. Miss Marple turned the pages carefully, finding the blackmail note Mrs. Weatherby had mentioned. It was brief, written in Eliza's hand. I know what you did, and it'll cost you. Below it, a single line. Dr. H knows more than she says. The implication was clear. Eliza had been pressing Dr. Hayes about a secret, perhaps related to her medical visits. But was it enough to drive the doctor to murder? Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Thorne, promising to return, and left with the diary's words echoing in her mind. As she walked back through the village, the festival preparations were in full swing, with bunting strung across the green, and the scent of baking wafting from every cottage. Miss Marple decided to confront Dr. Hayes, whose first aid tent was still set up near the festival site. The doctor was bandaging a villager's wrist, her movements precise, but her eyes flicked up as Miss Marple approached. Miss Marple, a surprise, she said, her tone polite but guarded. Come to check on the festival's health? Something like that, Miss Marple replied. Likely poisoner. Arthur, however, remained a focal point. His access to Foxglove, his typewriter, his rivalry with Eliza. She recalled the herbal scent on his coat, a clue that refused to fade. Determined to test her suspicions, Miss Marple visited the vicarage, where Reverend Clement was pruning his herb garden. The foxglove stood tall, its purple bells swaying in the breeze. Such a lovely garden, she said, her tone casual. You mentioned Arthur borrows clippings for his studies. Has he taken any foxglove recently? The vicar frowned, wiping his hands on a cloth. Now that you mention it, he did ask for some last week, said it was for a botanical sketch. I thought nothing of it. He's always been keen on plants. His voice carried a note of unease, and Miss Marple's heart quickened. Arthur's interest in foxglove was no coincidence. As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple passed the post office, where a new rumor was circulating. A villager claimed to have seen Arthur near the orchard the night Eliza died, carrying a lantern. The story was unconfirmed, but it added weight to her suspicions. She recalled a case from her girlhood, where a single witness had broken a killer's alibi. Could this be the thread that unraveled Arthur's facade? Returning to Danemead, Miss Marple found Cherry setting out a late lunch. Any news, Miss Marple? The maid asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. The village is all abuzz about that blackmail note. Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resuming its rhythmic click. News, Cherry, is like yarn, tangled until you find the right thread. A note, a scent, a secret. They're weaving together, but the pattern's not yet clear. She sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the day's discoveries. The blackmail note pointed to Dr. Hayes, but Arthur's access to Foxglove and the typewriter made him the stronger suspect. Giles and Lydia, while not cleared, seemed less likely, their motives weaker under scrutiny. Outside, the village settled into evening, the leaves and the distant lowing of cows from Farmer Harrow's fields. A comforting reminder of the rural idyll that masked the undercurrents of suspicion and deceit. Miss Marple, her wicker basket swinging gently at her side, felt the weight of the clues she carried, the glass shard glinting like a guilty secret, the apple core with its bitter residue, the blackmail note from Eliza's diary, and the forged letter that had briefly ensnared the vicar in rumor. Her mind, a well-ordered garden of logic, had pruned the suspects with the precision of her knitting shears. Giles Harrow's gruff demeanor and financial woes were red herrings, his alibi solid as the earth he tilled. Lydia Finch's ambition burned bright, but her post office alibi extinguished any direct involvement. Dr. Emily Hayes's past, secret, a professional misstep in London, lacked the venom to explain murder. Her tonics were benign, and the diary's accusation seemed a young girl's dramatic flourish. No, the clues pointed inexorably to Arthur Blackwood, his choirmaster's pride wounded by Eliza's superior talent, his botanical pursuits granting access to the vicarage foxglove, the herbal aroma clinging to his coat like an incriminating perfume. The initials on the torn hymn sheet all wove a tapestry of guilt. The poison, digitalis from foxglove, would have induced hallucinations and disorientation, compelling Eliza to the well in a fatal stumble, disguised as accident. Arriving at the vicarage, Miss Marple found Griselda Clement knee-deep in the garden, her hands soiled from weeding the herb beds. The vicarage garden was a haven of fragrance and color. Lavender's soothing purple spikes, rosemary's needle-like leaves releasing a piney scent when brushed, and the tall foxglove plants standing sentinel with their tubular flowers like fairy bells. "Griselda, my dear," Miss Marple greeted. "Your garden is a marvel, though some plants bear hidden dangers." Griselda straightened, brushing dirt from her apron, her face lighting with a smile. "Miss Marple, always a claims." "Hard indeed," Miss Marple murmured, rising. "People's tensions often stem from their own secrets, like weeds choking the flowers." She recalled a case in her youth where a gardener's poison pen letters hid a theft. Here, Arthur's inspiration masked a deadly brew. The foxglove, boiled into tea or infused in a vial, slipped to Eliza during practice, perhaps in her cocoa, would explain the delirium. The glass shard, likely from the vial, discarded in haste near the well. Bidding Griselda farewell, Miss Marple headed to the church, the bells silent, but the building humming with the choir's voices. The nave's stained glass windows painted the stone floor in jewel tones, and the loft above echoed with scales and corrections. Arthur conducted with fervor, his baton slashing the air, but his face was drawn, eyes shadowed. Lydia sang Eliza's part with earnest effort, her voice gaining strength, but Arthur halted her abruptly. "No, no, flat and lifeless. Eliza had fire. You must find it." Miss Marple ascended the stairs quietly, her presence noted but not interrupted. As practice ended, singers filed out, Lydia casting a grateful glance at the older woman. Arthur lingered, packing sheet music, his movements jerky. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "A moment. Your interest in foxglove, admirable, but dangerous. Clippings from the vicarage, used perhaps to silence a voice that outshone your own." Arthur whirled, color draining from his face. "Miss Marple, this is libelous. Eliza was talented, yes, but undisciplined. I argued with her over solos, nothing more. The hymn sheet? Dropped innocently. Poison? I know herbs for healing, not harm." His voice cracked, hands clenching, and Miss Marple noted the ink stains on his fingers, matching the smudges on the forged letter and Eliza's book. The vicarage typewriter, accessible to him, explained the typed accusation against the vicar, a diversion from his own deeds. Arguments can escalate, especially if Eliza discusses secret was a patient's death from overdose years ago. Eliza pried, but I had no reason to kill. The confirmation solidified Miss Marple's deduction. Arthur, fearing exposure of his plagiarism, Eliza had overheard him admitting to Lydia, or found copied sheets, poisoned her to protect his reputation. The lure note drew her to the orchard for confrontation, the well ensuring no witnesses. Finally, Miss Marple visited Lydia's modest cottage, where the girl was humming a hymn, her eyes red from practice's strain. "Miss Marple, come in. Tea?" "Perhaps later, dear." "You knew Eliza's suspicions about Arthur, didn't you? His stolen melodies." Lydia paled, setting the kettle down. "She told me weeks ago. Found his notebook with traced scores from a London composer. He begged her silence, but she planned to tell the vicar. I envied her talent, yes, but never harmed her. Arthur. He was furious that night at practice. Tears flowed. I saw him slip something into her cocoa. Thought it sugar. Oh, God." Miss Marple comforted her. "Truth heals, Lydia. Your witness seals it." As twilight fell, Miss Marple returned home, the clues unraveled. The herbal path led to Arthur's downfall. Tomorrow's revelation would bring justice to St. Mary Mead's cozy heart. Word count approximately 2,000. Chapter 9. The Revelation in the Parlor. The late afternoon sun cast a gentle glow over St. Mary Mead, its golden rays filtering through the ivy-clad windows of the vicarage, where Miss Jane Marple had orchestrated a gathering that promised to unravel the mystery of Eliza Thorne's death. It was the 6th day since the young choir girl's body was found in the old orchard well, and the village, though outwardly serene with its thatched cottages and blooming hedgerows, simmered with unspoken questions. The harvest festival had come and gone, leaving behind a trail of clues that Miss Marple had meticulously gathered. The torn hymn sheet with Arthur Blackwood's initials, the poisoned apple core, the glass shard from a vial, the blackmail note in Eliza's diary, and the forge against the doorframe. His notebook open, but his demeanor skeptical, as if expecting another of her meddling theories. Miss Marple sat in a cushioned armchair, her gray shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting basket at her feet, and her blue eyes twinkling with quiet determination. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice soft but commanding attention. "Eliza Thorne's death has cast a shadow over our village, and it's time we brought light to the truth. It was no accident, nor a suicide as some have suggested. Eliza was poisoned with foxglove, leading her to stumble into the well in a delirium. The question is, who wielded that poison, and why?" A murmur rippled through the room and Inspector Slack snorted. "Miss Marple, we've been over this. The girl fell. Tragic but simple. No need for theatrics." Miss Marple's smile was polite but unyielding. "Oh, Inspector, simplicity is often a mask for complexity. Let us consider the facts." She leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap. Eliza was found in her choir dress floating in the well, with a torn hymn sheet nearby, bearing Mr. Blackwood's initials. A note in her hymn book, "Meet me at the orchard," lured her there. A glass shard and an apple core, both tainted with foxglove, were found near the well, and a forged letter, typed on the vicarage machine, accused Reverend Clement of impropriety. a distraction, meant to mislead. Arthur Blackwood shifted uncomfortably, his angular face pale as he gripped his teacup. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice sharp. "My initials on a hymn sheet mean nothing. It could have been dropped days before. And I had no reason to harm Eliza. She was my star pupil, despite her lapses." Miss Marple's eyes met his, calm but piercing. "Star pupil, yes, but a threat to your pride, Mr. Blackwood. Eliza's talent outshone your own compositions, didn't it? Machine you used was meant to divert suspicion to Reverend Clement."
Griselda clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide. "Arthur had a key to the garden? Oh, Leonard, you trusted him!" Reverend Clement nodded, his face troubled.
"He borrowed clippings for his studies, foxglove among others. I thought it harmless."
Lydia Finch, her hands twisting her handkerchief, spoke up, her voice quavering. "Eliza told me about his compositions, how she found his notebook, full of melodies copied from an old score. She said she'd confront him, make him confess to the vicar. I begged her to let it go, but she was so determined." Tears welled in her eyes, and Miss Marple noted their sincerity, a stark contrast to her earlier feigned grief. Arthur stood, his face flushed with anger or fear. "This is slander. You've no proof, Miss Marple. I admired Eliza, argued with her, yes, but murder? I'd never stoop so low." Miss Marple's voice remained steady, her tone almost maternal. "Human nature, Mr. Blackwood, often stoops when pride is at stake. You slipped foxglove into her cocoa, knowing she'd drink it after practice. You wrote the note to lure her to the orchard where you met her. Perhaps to reason, but the poison took hold. She stumbled, dazed, and the well was a convenient end. The letter accusing the vicar was a desperate ploy, but the ink smudges on your fingers, matching those on Eliza's hymn book and the forged note, betray you." Inspector Slack stepped forward, his skepticism wavering. "Ink smudges? That's thin, Miss Marple. And this blackmail business, where's the evidence?" Miss Marple reached into her basket, producing the handkerchief-wrapped clues. "The apple core and shard, tested by Dr. Hayes, bear foxglove traces. The note in Eliza's diary, 'I know what you did,' points to her discovery. And Lydia's testimony confirms she knew of your plagiarism, Mr. Blackwood. A witness, Mrs. Price from the tea shop, saw you near the orchard that night, carrying a lantern. Your alibi was her gift, but also her curse. She saw through Mr. Blackwood's facade, and he could not bear exposure." Inspector Slack, now convinced, motioned to a constable waiting outside. "Arthur Blackwood, you're under arrest for the murder of Eliza Thorne. Come quietly." As Arthur was led away, his head bowed, the room exhaled, the tension breaking like a wave. Mrs. Thorne clutched Miss Marple's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "My Eliza can rest now." Griselda poured fresh tea, her hands trembling. "Miss Marple, how did you know? All those little things, ink, apples, notes." Miss Marple smiled, picking up her knitting. "The smallest details, my dear, tell the largest stories. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, truth hides in plain sight, if one looks closely." As the guests dispersed, the parlor grew quiet, the fire crackling softly. Miss Marple remained, her needles clicking, her mind already turning to the next day's tea, where she would explain the intricacies of the case to the village. The mystery was solved, but its echoes would linger,
a reminder of the fragility beneath the village's cozy charm. Chapter 10. Tea and Tranquility. The morning sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, bathing the village in a soft golden light that seemed to soothe the wounds left by the recent tragedy. The cobblestone lanes were quiet, save for the chirping of sparrows and the distant clatter of milk bottles being delivered, a comforting rhythm that signaled the return of normalcy. It was the 7th day since Eliza Thorne's body was found in the old orchard well, and the revelation of Arthur Blackwood's guilt in the vicarage parlor the previous afternoon had rippled through the community like a sigh of relief. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her cozy sitting room at Danemead, had invited a small group for morning tea to unravel the final threads of the mystery, her way of restoring peace to the village she loved. The air was fragrant with the scent of freshly brewed Earl Grey and Cherry's warm scones, their golden tops glistening on a lace-covered table. The room was a haven of barely contained as she hovered near the conversation. "Thank you for joining me," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but carrying the weight of authority earned through keen observation. "Eliza Thorne's death was a wound to our village, but truth, like a good cup of tea, has a way of soothing even the deepest hurts. I thought it fitting to share how the puzzle came together, for in St. Mary Mead, we heal through understanding." Inspector Slack shifted, his notebook closed but his skepticism evident. "Miss Marple, you've had your moment in the parlor. Blackwood's confessed, case closed. Why drag it out with tea and chatter?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled undeterred. "Because, Inspector, the why and how matter as much as the who. Human nature is a garden, full of beauty and thorns, and understanding it prevents future shadows." She sipped her tea, then set her cup down with deliberate care. "Let us begin with Eliza herself, a girl of remarkable talent, whose voice lifted our spirits in St. Mary's Church. But talent, my dears, often stirs envy and fear, and Eliza's brilliance cast a light that some could not bear." She turned to Mrs. Thorne, her voice gentle. "Your daughter was no mere choir girl. She had dreams of London stages, and her discovery of Arthur Blackwood's secret threatened his world. He had been passing off melodies, copied from a London composer, as his own. Eliza, with her sharp mind, found his notebook, its pages filled with traced scores. She confided in Lydia, hinting at confronting him, perhaps to urge honesty or, as her diary suggested, to demand a price for her silence. Lydia blushed, her voice trembling. "She told me a month ago, Miss Marple. I thought she was exaggerating. Arthur's compositions were so admired. I begged her to leave it alone, but Eliza was stubborn. She wanted him to own up." Miss Marple nodded, and that stubbornness, Lydia, sealed her fate. Arthur, whose pride was his music, could not risk exposure. He turned to the vicarage garden, where foxglove grew. A plant was too strong. She wandered, dazed, to the well, where she stumbled and fell, or was helped to her doom. The glass shard, from a vial he discarded, and the apple core, laced with foxglove perhaps as a test, were left behind in his panic. Dr. Hayes spoke up, her voice measured. "The symptoms align perfectly. Digitalis poisoning mimics an accident, especially in a fall. I tested the core and shard, as you asked, Miss Marple. The glycosides were unmistakable. Arthur miscalculated, or perhaps intended the outcome." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Thank you, Doctor. The hymn sheet with Arthur's initials was a careless mistake, dropped in haste or meant to mislead. But the forged letter accusing you, Reverend, was a deliberate distraction, typed on the vicarage machine to which Arthur had access. The ink smudges on his fingers, matching those on Eliza's hymn book and the letter, were the final thread. Inspector Slack grunted, his scowl softening. I'll admit, Miss Marple, you caught what I missed. That typewriter business. Clever. But why all this fuss over a few stolen songs? Miss Marple's smile was tinged with sadness. Pride, Inspector, is a powerful poison. Arthur lived for his music, his standing in the village. To be exposed as a fraud would have ruined him. Eliza, with her youth and talent, was a mirror to his flaws, and her threat to reveal his plagiarism pushed him to desperation. I've seen it before, in a village scandal years ago. A man who forged a will to save his name, undone by a single misstep. Mrs. Thorne wiped her eyes, her voice soft. My Eliza. She was so brave, so full of life. I wish she'd come to me instead of confronting him. Miss Marple reached out, her hand gentle on Mrs. Thorne's. She was brave, my dear, and her bravery brought the truth to light. You gave her a heart that sought justice, and that is her legacy. Griselda poured more tea, her hands steadier now. Miss Marple, how do you— You've got a nose for this, Miss Marple, I'll give you that.
Dr. Hayes lingered, her demeanor thoughtful. You've reminded me, Miss Marple, to be more open. Eliza's questions about my past, they were innocent, and I should have answered her. Perhaps it would have changed things. Perhaps, Miss Marple said gently. But we cannot change the past, only learn from it. Your skill heals this village, Doctor. Let that be your peace. As the guests departed, Mrs. Thorne clasped Miss Marple's hands, tears in her eyes. You've given me my daughter's truth. I can't thank you enough. Miss Marple patted her hand. Truth is its own thanks, my dear. Eliza rests easier now. Alone with Cherry, who cleared the table with a grin, Miss Marple settled back, her needles resuming their rhythmic click. Well, Miss Marple, Cherry said, you've done it again. The village is talking of nothing else. Will you tell me how you knew? Miss Marple chuckled softly. I knew, Cherry, because people are the same everywhere, village or city. They hide their fears, their prides, but they leave traces. A scent, a note, a glance. They're the stitches of truth. Now pour us another cup, and let's enjoy this quiet morning. Outside, St. Mary Mead returned to its gentle rhythm. The church bells tolling noon with a melody that felt lighter, as if the village had exhaled its grief. The mystery was solved, the killer unmasked, and the community, like Miss Marple's knitting, was whole again. She sipped her tea, her mind at ease, knowing that in this cozy corner of England, truth always found its way through the lace curtains.